Get pulled into a sapphire vortex of mystery and emotion, where every twist of the story reveals a deeper layer of truth. Our stunning 3D visuals take you on a journey through the highs and lows of the human experience. Hit subscribe now and don't get lost in the dark.
My director had never once spoken to me directly in 2.5 years. Not good morning, not nice work on the Pembroke file, not even a nod in the hallway. Warren Holt was the kind of man who moved through an office like weather. You felt the pressure change before he arrived, and everyone got very still. So when his assistant appeared at my desk that Tuesday morning and said quietly, "He wants to see you." Now, his office, I actually looked behind me to make sure she was talking to the right person. She was. I followed her down the hall with my coffee still in my hand, trying to think of anything I could have done wrong. Nothing came to mind. I processed claims. I flagged irregularities. I followed procedure. I had been doing exactly that for 2.5 years and nobody had ever called me upstairs for it. His door was already closed when we got there. His assistant knocked once, opened it without waiting for an answer, then stepped aside to let me in. She didn't come in herself. She closed the door behind me, and I heard the lock turn. That was when I knew something was wrong. My director was standing with his back to the window. Atlanta spread out 30 floors below him, all glass and morning haze. He looked smaller than he did in conference rooms. His jacket was off, his sleeves were rolled up, and when he finally turned to face me, I saw that the color had gone out of him entirely. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. He didn't ask me to sit down. He didn't offer a handshake. He crossed to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a manila envelope sealed with packing tape. My name, Monica, was written on the front in blue ballpoint ink. Someone had pressed down hard. The letters were deep. He pushed it across the desk toward me. "Don't open that here," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Go back to your desk, get your purse, tell no one, leave the building. Go pick up your son from school right now before the afternoon. Go home, pack enough for a few days and do not for any reason, stay in your apartment past 7 o'clock tonight." I stared at him. "I'm sorry, what?" "There's no time for questions." He looked at the door, then back at me. "I made a mistake. I should have done this sooner. I waited too long because I was afraid. And now they know that you flagged it. They saw the log, Monica." He said my name like it was the last word in a sentence he'd been building for a long time. "Please, go get your son." I left his office holding that envelope, and I don't remember walking back to my desk. I remember standing in front of my computer, not seeing the screen. I remember picking up my purse. I remember the woman from the cubicle next to mine asking if I was okay. And I told her I had a migraine. Because it was the first thing I could think of. I got outside into the heat and kept walking until I was half a block from the building. Then I stopped, pressed my back against a brick wall, and looked down at the envelope in my hands. My name, written hard, like it mattered. I hailed a cab. I didn't take the subway like I normally would have. I told the driver to take me to my son's school. My son Eli is 9. He has his father's dark eyes and my stubborn streak, and he thinks everything is either an adventure or an injustice, with very little in between. His father and I split when Eli was 4, not dramatically, not bitterly, just the slow and honest acknowledgement that we had become different people who wanted different things. He remarried and moved to Phoenix 2 years ago. We're civil. We talk on holidays. Eli flies out every summer, but day to day, it's me and my son in our apartment in Midtown. And I have built that life carefully and without help, and I am proud of every part of it. That is the thing you need to understand about what happened next. I wasn't someone with nothing to lose. I had everything to lose. I signed my son out early and told his teacher it was a family thing. He bounced out of the classroom with his backpack half unzipped, already asking if we were going somewhere. I told him we were taking a little trip. I told him it was a surprise. He asked if it was the beach, because he'd been asking about the beach since June, and I told him not the beach, but close. He spent the whole cab ride home telling me about a lizard he'd seen on the playground, in a level of anatomical detail I could not follow under any circumstances, let alone that one. At the apartment, I unlocked the door and stood in the middle of the living room while he went to feed his fish. I held the envelope for a long moment. Then I opened it. Inside were 3 things. A folded piece of paper handwritten. A burner phone with a rubber-banded index card around it that said, "Do not call until instruct," and a photograph. The photograph was printed on plain paper, like it had come from a regular office printer. It showed my son standing on the sidewalk in front of his school. He was wearing his blue jacket, the one with the broken zipper we'd been meaning to get fixed, and his dinosaur's backpack. He was smiling at something off to the left. I had dropped him off that morning at 7:52. This photo was taken after I left. Someone had been standing outside his school, watching him, and had taken his picture and gotten it to my director in time for him to seal it in that envelope, before 9 in the morning. I had to sit down. The note said, "They know you accessed the Daryl account. You didn't understand what you found, but they don't know that. To them, you are a loose end. My system needs you specifically. I'll explain in the recording. Do exactly what the phone tells you. Do not contact anyone you know. Get out of Atlanta before 7 p.m. Trust the man who meets you. He has been waiting longer for this than either of us." My hands weren't shaking. I want to be clear about that, because I expected them to shake, and they didn't. Everything went very quiet and very clear. The way it does sometimes, when something is actually serious. When your body understands before your brain does, that this is not the moment to fall apart. I remembered the Daryl account. 3 weeks ago I had been processing a stack of settled claims from a subsidiary list. Routine work, the kind that fills a Tuesday afternoon. One of the entries was a payout for a man named G. Daryl, settlement approved, check issued, but when I cross-referenced the claimant number out of habit. I always cross-reference, it takes 30 seconds. I found that G. Daryl had been marked deceased in our own system 8 months earlier. Died of complications from occupational chemical exposure. Claim closed. The settlement check, $47,000, had been issued 2 weeks ago, to a man our own records said was dead. I flagged it, wrote it up, sent it to my department supervisor and assumed it was a clerical error. She wrote back the same afternoon, reviewed, resolved. Move on. I moved on, I forgot about it until now. I called my son in from his room and told him to pack his dinosaur backpack with enough clothes for 3 days. And his Nintendo and his stuffed armadillo, Mr. Plates, that he will deny caring about in public but sleeps with every night without fail. He didn't ask questions. He trusts me the way children trust their mothers when the mother's voice is steady. Completely. And without evidence. While he packed, I pulled out my regular phone. There was a text from an unknown number. It said, "There is a gray sedan parked across from your building's east entrance. Do not use the front door. Take the stairwell to the basement. Exit through the loading dock. Keep moving." I turned off my regular phone. I picked up the burner. We went down the back way. My son thought it was a game. He kept saying, "Spy mission" under his breath, and trying to walk pressed against the wall like he'd seen in movies. Under any other circumstances I would have laughed. I held his hand instead, and I counted the floors, and when we came out into the alley behind the building, and I saw nothing except dumpsters and pigeons. I breathed for the first time since I'd left the office. I had parked my car on a side street. We walked to it without running, which took effort. As I buckled my son into the back seat, the burner phone buzzed. A text, "Head to Peachtree Station. Buy 2 tickets to Savannah. Cash only. Train leaves at 1:45. I had $60 in my wallet. I stopped at a pharmacy ATM 2 blocks away and pulled out $300. I kept checking the rearview mirror. There was a black truck behind us that I couldn't stop watching. When I turned left on Ponce de Leon, it turned left. When I merged onto the highway, it merged. I took an exit I didn't need, looped around a strip mall parking lot, came back out on a different block. The truck didn't follow. My heart didn't slow down for another 20 minutes. We made the 1:45 with 4 minutes to spare. My son fell asleep somewhere around Macon with his head against the window, and Mr. Plates tucked under his arm. I sat beside him and watched the Georgia landscape flatten out and go green, and I thought about my director's face. The color gone out of it. The voice that barely made it across the desk. Whatever this was, it had scared a man I did not think was afraid of anything. We pulled into Savannah just before 4 in the afternoon. The air was thick and smelled like salt and old wood and something floral I couldn't name. Tourists moved slowly on the sidewalks outside the station. Spanish moss hung from the live oaks like the city was trying to keep its secrets draped and comfortable. The burner phone buzzed. "Walk to the fountain in Forsyth Park. Someone will find you." He was already there when we arrived. A man in his mid-50s sitting on a bench with a cup of coffee, watching the fountain like he had nowhere else to be. He had a military posture that he was trying not to show. When he saw me, he stood. "Monica," he said, "not a question." "Yes. My name is Felix, your director sent me." He looked at my son. "Hey buddy, you like hot chocolate? There's a place 2 blocks from here." My son looked at me, I nodded, and we walked. Felix talked while my son drank his hot chocolate and looked out the window at the street. Felix spoke carefully, in the way of someone who has practiced explaining something many times and still isn't sure how to make it land gently. He told me that my company, Blackwell Mutual, had been running a systematic fraud for at least 6 years. On paper, they were processing settlements for factory workers who had developed lung disease, nerve damage, cancer from chemical plant exposures across the Southeast. Hundreds of claims. In practice, a portion of those settlements, the ones tied to claimants who had died before their checks cleared, were being rerouted. Not returned to the company. Rerouted to a network of shell companies that funneled money to a lobbying organization serving the interests of a man named Dale Mercer, a U.S. congressman from Georgia, who sat on the House Financial Services Committee and had spent 4 years quietly burying every bill that would have required companies like Blackwell to submit to independent claims audits. The dead were being used to pay the man who made sure no one looked. "Your director figured it out 18 months ago, Felix said. He built a case in secret because anyone he brought into the company got reassigned or quietly let go. He couldn't go to federal authorities directly. He'd tried twice, and both times the tip was traced back to him within a week. So he built an encrypted archive and designed a dual authorization release system. His authorization was set on a dead man's switch. If he didn't log in every 24 hours, his key submitted automatically." "And the second key?" I asked. Felix folded his hands around his cup. "He designated you." I waited. "He's been watching you for over a year. The way you work. The fact that you cross-reference everything, even when no one asks you to. The Daryl flag. When you flagged that account and got told to move on, and you moved on without pushing back. That told him you had enough judgment to know when to hold and when to let go. He set you up as the authorized witness in the system 8 months ago. You received an authentication code to your work email 72 hours ago." I thought about my email. The batch of system notifications I'd scrolled past Monday morning without opening. "You didn't open it," Felix said. "It wasn't an accusation." I didn't know what it was. "You don't need to have opened it. The code is still there. When we reach the archive, you open the email, enter the code, and the system completes the release." His key submitted automatically at noon today, 24 hours after he stopped checking in. The moment he gave you that envelope this morning, he knew he wasn't going back. We sat in silence for a moment. My son was tracing something on the foggy window with his finger. A rocket ship, I thought. Or maybe a fish. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Somewhere with a secure connection and 4 walls," Felix said. "Come on." The house was on a side street in the historic district, pale yellow with green shutters, the kind that looks like it belongs on a postcard. Inside it was nothing like that. One of the bedrooms had been converted into a workspace, a folding table, a satellite router, 2 laptops, and stacks of drive cases organized by date. Maps were pinned to one wall. I recognized street names from Atlanta, from Macon, from towns along the I-16 corridor, where most of the affected factories were located. Felix set my son up in the next room with his Nintendo and a bag of pretzels. He left the door open between us. "Before we go to the system," Felix said, "you should see this first." He opened a laptop and pressed play on a video file. My director looked older than he had that morning, which should not have been possible. He was sitting at a plain desk in a plain room, and there was a cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there when I saw him. He spoke directly at the camera, with the focused calm of a person who understands. They may not get another chance to say what they're saying. "Monica, If you're watching this, Felix reached you in time. Good. He paused. I owe you an explanation, and I owe you an apology. I put you in the path of something dangerous without your knowledge or consent. I told myself I was choosing you because your integrity made you the right person. That's true, but it's also true that I was afraid to tell you directly. Because I knew you might say no, and I needed someone in that position. I'm sorry for that. He looked down at his hands for a moment. The system needs your authentication to release the full archive to the federal court system, 3 independent journalists, and the SEC simultaneously. My key auto-submitted. Yours is the final lock. The code is in your work email, subject line. System notification. Document access verification. Enter it in the confirmation window on the secure laptop. That's all. That's the whole thing. He allowed himself something that was almost a smile. I know that sounds too simple. But I designed it that way on purpose. The simplest possible action for the person taking the most risk. He straightened. The account you flagged, G. Darryl, that account connects to 41 others. What I didn't know until last week was that Darryl himself is still alive. He never received any settlement. His identity was used without his knowledge. He's been trying to get answers from the company for 8 months, working 2 jobs to cover medical bills, and no one has told him anything. There are 41 more families like his. I hadn't known that part, a real man, still alive, still waiting. My director looked at the camera for a long moment. You were the right person, he said. Not because of what you know. Because of what you do when you think no one is watching. The video ended. I sat with that for a minute. Outside the window, the Savannah evening was coming in golden and slow. I could hear my son's game making soft sound effects in the next room. Little beeps and music. I was about to pull up the work email on the secure laptop when Felix held up his hand. He was listening to something. His body had changed. Not tense exactly, but aligned, the way a person gets when attention sharpens down to a point. Backroom, he said. Take your son now. I didn't ask. I went to the next room, scooped my son off the floor, ignored his protest about being mid-level, and carried him to the closet at the back of the house. Felix was already moving through the hallway, low and fast. There was a sound outside that I couldn't identify at first, then I could. Footsteps. Multiple sets, coordinated, not the random rhythm of people passing on a sidewalk. My son pressed his face into my shoulder and went still. He understood, in the way children sometimes do, that this was the moment to be quiet. The back door opened with a crash. Felix's voice sharp, "Don't move down." Something breaking. A shout. Then 3 gunshots that were louder than anything I had ever heard in my life, so loud they seemed to change the air pressure in the room. Then, silence. Then Felix's voice again strained. "Monica, come out, it's clear." He had a gash on his forearm that was bleeding through his sleeve. 2 men were zip-tied on the kitchen floor, and the back door hung open to the alley. Felix told me not to ask about what had happened with a third, in a tone that closed the subject entirely. "We have maybe 20 minutes before their people start looking for a check-in," he said. "Let's finish this." I sat down at the secure laptop. I opened my work email on the secondary device. Felix handed me. Scrolled to Monday, found the notification. Subject system notification. Document access verification. Inside was a 16-digit code. I typed it into the confirmation window. Then, I stopped. "Wait," I said. Felix looked at me. The Darryl account. The 41 others. I had been turning something over in my mind since the video, something about the way the account numbers had been formatted, when I'd first flagged it. The prefix sequence. Did anyone cross-reference that prefix against the denied claims database? Not the settled ones, the ones that were denied and closed without payment. Felix frowned. That database wasn't in the archive. I have access to it through my work login. I looked at him. If they were running the same scheme on the denial side, using deceased claimants' information to file fraudulent reimbursement requests against federal healthcare pools, the numbers would be bigger. A lot bigger. Felix was quiet for 3 seconds. How long? 20 minutes, maybe 15. Do it. I pulled up the denied claims database. ran the prefix filter I remembered from the Darrell file, and cross-referenced against the federal reimbursement pool records that Blackwell's compliance portal connected to. It took 11 minutes. What came back was not 41 accounts. It was 218. The total fraudulent draw from federal healthcare reimbursement pools over 6 years. $31 million. My director hadn't known. Even with everything he'd uncovered, he hadn't known how far it reached. I downloaded the full export to the secure drive and added it to the upload queue. Then I pressed enter. The confirmation window filled with green status bars, one after another. Federal Court Filing System, connected. IRS Criminal Investigation Division, connected. Associated Press, Wall Street Journal, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, connected. SEC Enforcement Portal, connected. The archive went out into the world like a tide going out. Unstoppable, taking everything with it. Felix exhaled through his nose. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, the way people do when something has finally happened. That they stopped believing would happen. The emergency phone on the table rang. I answered it. My director's voice came through, thin and tired but unmistakably there. "You did it," he said. "You're alive," I said, which was obvious, but I needed to say it. For now. Did it go through? Everything. Including 218 accounts you didn't have. A longer silence. Denied claims database, the prefix matched. "I should have thought of that," he said. "You built the whole thing," I said. I just cross-referenced. What happened after is the part that felt unreal, even as it was happening. Federal agents arrested the Blackwell CFO at his home in Buckhead at 11 that night. The company's outside legal team began issuing statements before midnight, the kind of statements that are really just proof that you know you've lost. Congressman Mercer's office put out a denial at 1 in the morning that was so specific in what it denied it told you exactly how much they knew was coming. He was detained at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport 2 days later, carry-on bag in hand, 4 passports inside. Only one of them was his. My director entered federal witness protection. I don't know where he is. I was told he is safe, and that his testimony is what investigators are calling comprehensive. I was told he described me in his deposition as the most reliable person in a building full of people who learn to look the other way. I read that sentence and had to put the paper down for a minute. Darrell, the real one, received a call from an FBI victim advocate. He had been trying to understand what happened to his settlement for 8 months. While working double shifts to cover the medical bills his chemical exposure had left him with, he will receive what he is owed, plus damages, plus an apology from a federal agency, which is not the same as justice but is more than he had. So will the others. All 218 families, and more who were found when investigators pulled the full thread. Felix helped us relocate temporarily while the security situation was assessed. For 3 weeks, my son and I lived in a government safe house in a town I am not allowed to name, which my son found thrilling, and which I found exhausting in the particular way that only high-stakes limbo can be exhausting. The FBI offered new identities and a relocation package. I asked for time to think about it. In the end, we went home. There is security monitoring now that I have been told I'll stop noticing after 6 months. I've been told a lot of things I'm choosing to believe. On the first morning back, I made my son pancakes the way he'd been asking for since before any of this started. He sat at the kitchen table with syrup on his chin and watched me at the stove with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mom," he said. "Yeah, buddy. Are the people who were following us in trouble now?" I turned around and looked at him, 9 years old, dark eyes, syrup on his chin, completely serious. "Yeah," I said. "They're in a lot of trouble." He thought about this. "Good," he said and went back to his pancakes. So it settled it because for him, in the clean logic of 9 years old, it did. I stood there at the stove and thought about all the things I could say about what happened. About courage, about justice, about ordinary people and extraordinary circumstances. I've heard all of those words applied to this story, and they're not wrong exactly. But they also miss something. I wasn't trying to be brave, I was trying to get my son to safety. The bravery was just what happened in between. What I know is this. I have cross-referenced things my whole career because I am the kind of person who cross-references things. Not because anyone told me to. Not because there was a reward for it. Because it seemed like the right way to do the work. And one Tuesday afternoon, on a completely ordinary Tuesday, that habit turned out to matter in a way I couldn't have predicted. And couldn't have planned. You don't always get to know in advance which of your small acts of integrity will end up counting. You just have to keep doing them and trust that, somewhere, somehow they add up to something. In this case, they added up to 218 families who had been waiting in the dark for answers and finally got them. Not because a hero arrived. Because a claims analyst cross-referenced a prefix sequence and didn't talk herself out of noticing that something was wrong. My name is Monica. I process insurance claims, and for one very long week in October, that turned out to be exactly enough